Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, one in a series organized by Thornton. As you may know, there has been a nationwide survey which was published by Thornton on the effects of COVID-19 on the Maltese household expenditure. We are today joined by Brian Camilleri, who is an economist at Malta Enterprise, Dr. Gordon Cordina, who is also an economist, Anthony Gregg, who is a top executive at Green Supermarket, and Mr. Tony Zara, who needs no introduction, and who is a vociferous lobbyist for the hotel industry. The idea of the webinar today is to to go around some industries that operate locally to understand the effect that COVID-19 had on these industries, and hopefully to identify some lessons learned from the experience that we have collectively gone through. I will, as with all other webinars, participants are encouraged to put forward questions, and hopefully the panelists will be able to answer those questions. I will start the proceedings with asking Tony Zara to share with us the experience that he has gone through. I know for a fact that as I introduced him, he was one of the main participants in shaping the Maltese economy's response to the effects of COVID-19, and I really am looking forward for Mr. Tony Zara to share with us these experiences and the effect, the measures that he has influenced to be put in place have had on the members of MHRA and any other sectors that he is involved in. Tony?
Thank you very much, George, for the introduction. And I will speak a little bit about the industry. We entered 2020 full of faith that we're going to have another record year. This would have been about the 9th year in a row where the industry would have expanded. So we were very confident about the outcome of 2020. And January and February both were indicating that we were on course to have a record year. In fact, both January and February were exceptional compared to the same months of 2019. It was in February when the COVID started being talked about here in Europe, and there was a lot of talk about this, but nothing dramatic. We were all thinking that this is going to be something which is going to pass by very quickly and possibly not hit us very hard. By the end of March, we had gone from a situation where we were looking towards another record year to zero income. Now, there cannot be anything more dramatic than losing a partial amount of your turnover, 10, 20%, but there is something even more dramatic. And the more dramatic is that you go from 100% turnover to zero turnover. We pulled down the shutters on the industry. And that is something incredible. You had a 2.1 billion euro industry, and all of a sudden you have a €0 industry. So we were faced with a dramatic situation. We were faced with a situation where we had outgoings huge outgoings, all the overheads, but nothing coming in. And it was this reason why we went to government straight away, and we said we need urgently now serious help, not just partial help, but serious help if we are to avoid a massive disruption of the economy. Thank goodness the government was in a position financially where there was room for giving serious help without crippling the economy. And also, one thing that the Maltese economy has a lot of was liquidity. The banks are extremely liquid and there's lots of money in Malta. So we convinced the government to take a number of actions. The first action was help with our employees, help with paying for the employees. This helped to keep the employees technically at work, but it did not make them unemployment. So that cushioned the psychological effect of people being out of work, and that did not give the economy that shock that all of a sudden you had a lot of people who were out of work. Maybe they got the same amount of money as they would have got on benefits, but they were not out of work. And that was a very important psychological act that we did to help the economy stay stable. Then we did a number of actions which were very necessary. We convinced the banks and the regulatory authorities to have a moratorium. We convinced on loans, which was very important because all of a sudden we had cash flows which we had to look after. We convinced the authorities to postpone the receipt of VAT and NICE. And there were a number of other smaller initiatives which helped towards making this dramatic decrease in revenues, this absolute loss of revenue into something that was manageable. That was the first thing. It was clear that we could not survive a situation where the airport would be closed indefinitely. And the second area that we started working on is to reopen the airport. We had a lot of pushback on this from everywhere. And people were saying we should keep the airport closed till the end of the year. We should not do anything of the sort. Well, if we look at today's situation and you go out into the street and you ask people, how important is the tourist industry to this economy, you'll realize that a lot of people are saying, wow, we have no business. And this is after we have opened the airport. Just imagine, George, what would have happened if we had not opened the airport? And this is how important the industry to the island is, how important the tourism industry to the island is. We have a situation now going forward where opening the airport for July, we had about 27% of seat availability as we had for July last year. For August, we go up to about 44% of seat capacity of last year. And for September, we go up to 50% of seat capacity. So we're going up. The difference is between now and previously is previously you put on the seat capacity and the tourist would come. We're in a different situation. You know, we have put on the seat capacity. Now we've got to put people on board those aircraft. There is a great hesitancy out there for people to fly. They're more likely to get into the car and drive 3 hours or 4 hours from their home and have the vacation that they used to have flying to the Mediterranean within either domestically or within a few hours drive from where they live. So we have a challenge to make sure that those seats that we have put on now are actually filled. We could, George, as you said, we could be looking at a second wave. I cannot discount that, and nobody can discount that. And possibly it will happen in October or November. It's a flu, it goes and it comes. So the possibility is there. The last thing that we can afford to do is to close the economy again. If we close the economy again, the impact will be much, much bigger than it was in the first round. So we have to have a plan of how to manage a second wave. And there are, I don't want to go into the health issue, but now we know much more about the C19 than what we knew going into it. We know, for example, that there are groups which are vulnerable and groups which are not vulnerable. So, if we're going to handle this, let's handle it from the point of view of looking after the vulnerable. But we cannot afford, whatever we do, we cannot afford to close the economy again. I think I've given you an overview of what's happening this year, perhaps a short look at 2021. The best numbers I've heard for 2021 in terms of arrivals is half of what we got in 2019, 1.3 million against 2.7 million. That is the situation. So again, here we have to manage a situation where probably we will lose about 1.3 billion of revenue as against 2019. These are not small amounts, these are huge amounts, but we have to manage them. I think the economy is in pretty good shape to manage it. Now we've got to be very innovative in order to ensure that we minimize the impact that these numbers have on the economy. Thank you, George.
Thank you so much, Anthony, for a very good roundup of the hotel sector and the restaurant sectors. I would like now to invite Anthony Grech of Greens, the top executive at Greens, to share with us his experience. Greens, as Anthony will explain, has different various businesses, not only the supermarkets that we all know about, and maybe give us also some insights as to things which have now become a necessity, which may be things which we were tinkering about before COVID and now have become a necessity. In your safe hands, Anthony.
Good afternoon, George. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invite, first of all. So basically, obviously, when the year started, as Tony was saying, we were seeing that in terms of economy, it was going to strengthen again further. Obviously, in terms of our industry, it was a shock. It was a positive shock from our end. There was, I would say, at the beginning of March, when panic buying started. And however, even though there was a positive approach, it affected a lot our supply chain, and we started to have issues in terms of stocks and in terms of demand. And apart from that, even though that the supermarket was going well, we started to obviously have the other companies being affected, namely the manufacturing and food processing factory, which obviously provides the majority of catering and restaurants and hotels in Malta when it comes to fruit and veg. And basically it immediately got impacted, and we literally had to almost halt all of the business. When it basically happened, we had to reshift certain employees. Luckily, we were able to do so because of the supermarket, where the demand and the impact was very high. And basically, we have to shift and train various staff members to do other new things. Apart from that, we also have a restaurant from our end, which obviously got impacted as well in terms of the pandemic. When this happened, obviously, again, we had to shift and train other members in order to be with different skills and obviously remain innovative. So even though there was a positive side, it still had a large impact on us. After let's say 2 to 3 weeks time, then the e-commerce started to shift very to the high side as well, and there was a panic from our end, because we were obviously not prepared, even though we're 6 years with experience in the e-commerce side. The surge and the amount of orders that we had was overwhelming, and we had to literally work 24/7. And obviously we had to see the positive side to it, and we started to even help other companies by helping them with providing their staff to work with our industry. And with these resources and even other third-party services, we managed to keep the economy going, let's say, during the pandemic for even other companies, and not just the supermarket itself. Apart from that, we had to implement a lot of policies, COVID policies, which at first had again an impact in terms of let's say not knowing the unknown. So everyone was sort of like panicking, even in terms of the clientele. But after a while, we got used to it, and even in terms from the clientele, they got used to it as well. Another thing that affected us, and we saw a change in behavior, was in the terms of shopping, what people were actually buying, and how they are paying. This is an interesting part, because now we're seeing a big shift of people going contactless, paying always by card. There is a high percentage, and it seems that in terms of the payment shift, it's going more to the visas and the cashless systems. Apart from that, we had to also learn from this, and we had to diversify our business. But however, even though we're doing so, we're now seeing some impact due to the positioning of the supermarkets, being in Gozo and being in Svi, where they are touristic areas. In fact, we already are seeing some negative impact in terms of turnover and revenue with regards to let's say June. But we're obviously aiming to keep it positive when it comes to Gozo, since the Maltese are now obviously doing their summer holidays in that island. So to enforce on what Tony was saying before, the tourism industry is a key factor for everyone, and not just the hotels and the restaurants. It's the population obviously doubles during summer, and if we do not keep ourselves innovative and try to obviously keep the economy flowing, then obviously it will have a bigger impact, especially if we're going to have a second wave. I think the second wave would be definitely an issue for everyone, and I cannot see that the government is able to do the measures that were done in the first wave, because the economy impact would be overwhelming.
Anthony, in terms of your shift to e-commerce, you said that in terms of payments, the preference is definitely going in favor of less. Anthony, do you see e-commerce staying with us, or are you already seeing a reduction in e-commerce and an increase in physical buying?
So in terms of e-commerce, I think there was already a slight reduction, obviously, because people are now going out and they're even buying and using their funds elsewhere. And obviously some were also overstocked. But in terms of e-commerce, we're still seeing an increase when it compared to last year, and certain clients remained loyal. And they're still using it because obviously they found it convenient for them for their lifestyles. So even though it decreased, there's still an increase in terms of when compared to last year. So we're anticipating that it will get more popular both in Malta and Gozo, because in Gozo it was, let's say, almost 6 months that we had initiated the e-commerce, and if I'm not mistaken, there was no one before providing grocery online shopping in Gozo, and there's still an increase. So we have a team. In fact, in Malta we have a team of around 24 people, and in Gozo we have another team of 5 people when it comes to the e-commerce section. So I would say
and
that
in terms of numbers, are you in a position to share? Is it 1 in 5, 1 in 10?
So in terms of numbers, I would say that at prior the pandemic, we were let's say 5% of the turnover, and after the pandemic, I think we are now looking at 10 to 12%. So there is quite a shift when compared to last year.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Now I would like to invite Brian Camilleri of Malta Enterprise to widen a little bit the conversation to include other sectors which Malta Enterprise is closer to. Brian?
Thank you, George, for the invite, and good afternoon to everyone who is attending the webinar. Obviously, the sectors that have been impacted, I mean, if we look on a global level, we form part of what is happening beyond our shores as well. So in terms of sectors, I would mention that there is the wholesale and retail buyers that are being impacted, accommodation and food services. This is also being reflected in the weight supplement scheme that Malta Enterprise is entrusted to run on behalf of the Maltese government. I would say that around 45% of all the money disbursed so far goes towards these sectors, and also 45% of all the employees covered operate in these sectors. I mean, this gives a clear understanding of the main sectors that are being impacted in Malta. Obviously, I mean, I was hearing also Tony Zara speaking before about the impact of tourism. It is interesting to note that what is happening globally with respect to tourism also affects certain activities that take place within Malta's manufacturing sector. If we have to think a bit about the maintenance, repair and overhaul of aircrafts, obviously these depend on the fact that there is tourism taking place, that the planes are flying and that they are not grounded. And the fact that tourism was impacted, the planes require less maintenance. So the sector, which is important within the manufacturing sector of maintenance, repairs and overhaul, has been impacted adversely by this. At the same time, one also needs to appreciate that there were other sectors that were impacted actually positively from what was happening. If we look at the pharmaceutical industry and at the medical devices, for example, it is public domain that there were companies such as Metalform and Baxter that were experiencing a surge in demand during the pandemic for their products. And actually they were increasing the number of people that they were recruiting with them. I mean, this also shows the importance of having a well-diversified economy throughout. I mean, here we're not speaking about having a manufacturing sector, about having a tourism sector, about having a wholesale and retail, but that actually within these sectors, we have different niches that can actually counterbalance the negative shocks that they are experiencing. I would also like to mention and relate to the point that Anthony mentioned previously about the way that people are paying. From the survey that Grant Thornton has carried out, it is determined that around 76% of those of the respondents actually commented that they do not intend to use cash after the pandemic and they want to stick to the digital means of how to pay. And this brings about a lot of opportunities as well. I mean, this is a behavioral change. Whether it will be for the long term or it's something short term that will diffuse, one still needs to actually assess this. However, it seems that even abroad from other surveys carried out, this shift will be of a permanent nature, where people will tend to move away from using cash and moving more towards the use of cards and other digital forms of payment.
Thank you, Brian. Gordon, the latest forecasts are showing that we are in for a 6% contraction in the local economy, with a 6% rebound in 2021. Is that attainable? Is that achievable when Tony has shared with us the projections for the tourism industry for 2021? And another big question, obviously, is can Malta really afford all of this? Are we in for a tough ride in the medium term as a result of COVID? Gordon.
Yes, thank you, George. I think, yes, that the best or most optimistic projections for the economy is that we return by 2022 to a situation where we were as in 2019. That means that we would have lost 2 years of economic growth, which would be affordable in the context of the strong economic growth rates that we had been experiencing over the past number of years. So in that sense, macroeconomic figures aren't all that worrying, especially when compared to other countries. In a similar way, in terms of the affordability, we will possibly have to go to a situation where government debt to GDP would be in a range of between 55% and 60%, which is still below where we were a decade or so ago. So once again, in this kind of situation, and also within the context that the debt to GDP levels of other countries will also be increasing significantly in this new normal, I don't think that the macroeconomic situation or the macroeconomic numbers are the chief worry which is facing us. I would be more interested to carry forward the kind of discussion which Tony Zara has been taking forward in terms of asking ourselves, will a reduced number of tourists be the new normal? Will a reduced number of bed nights arrivals be the new normal? If that is going to be the case, will we then be satisfied with also having a lower number of expenditure for these from these tourists? Let us not forget that for every 1 billion that the tourists spend, around 1.5 billion is then generated in our economy through multiplier effects. Or should we be talking as from now on how to extract more value from each tourist, which is the decades-old question, basically, how shall we move away from numbers and into quality, especially in this situation where similar shocks are also affecting our competitors. So if our competitors will be more nimble than us in this respect, we stand to lose. If, however, we do the right things now to adjust to the new situation and exploit the opportunities, then this debacle will eventually entail opportunities for us. And this is where I believe we should be extending this kind of discussion, not only in tourism, but also in the various areas of manufacturing, in financial services, in other services, digital ICT, gaming. This is a new normal we'll be facing. Up till now, we've followed the recipe of Keynes, which basically told us 70 years ago to throw money at economic problems. And we've thrown a substantial amount of money at this problem. We continue to do so, and it's definitely the right thing to do to maintain our psychology and our expectations and our enterprises and our workers intact. But now that the Keynesian solution is tried and tested, we will soon find that it is not enough. It's not enough to throw money at problems. We now have to come up with realistic and feasible solutions. So no more longer Keynes, but now we have to go towards Darwin, who told us that it is not the most intellectual or the strongest species which will survive, but it's the most adaptable one. How are we in each and every one of our economic sectors adapting? Is it enough? Or are we just doing things which we should have done a number of years ago, such as going to electronic payments, such as trying to exploit new markets for tourism, higher value added for tourism? Mind you, if they were urgent 10 years ago, now they have become imperative. So let's discuss this. Let's also discuss how to exploit the new opportunities brought about by COVID so that we can effectively run faster than our competitors away from this bear that is chasing us all, which is the COVID situation. I think that these arguments make sense whether or not COVID is a permanent or temporary thing. If we make these adjustments, we will be benefiting irrespective of whether a vaccine for COVID is found or not, or whether COVID will be making a second or a third round, or whether in a few years' time will be affected by a COVID-like situation once again. So that is now the supply side questions that we should be asking. How fast is our business restructuring to adapt to these new realities?
Thank you, Gordon. You've touched upon a very, very interesting subject. It's quality versus quantity, if I may call it that way in simple terms. As you rightly said, this is something that has been, it's a burning question for Malta, trying to upgrade our quality to attract higher value added companies, higher value added tourists. But really and truly, when I have been brought up with this maxim that Malta needs to lower its numbers and increase its quality and value added. But really and truly, are we there? Are we going to actually achieve this target, which seems to be very elusive? I don't know whether Tony or Gordon want to take this.
Gordon, I'll let you have your say first, and then I'll come in later.
Very good, Tony. I think that it is now no longer a question of strategic choice. It is now possibly a necessity for our tourist industry to continue contributing as strongly as it used to up to 2019 and before. If there is something that I hate to talk about is the tourism sector or the tourism industry. To my mind, it does not exist. There are so many niches of tourists, starting from the guys who come to play at casinos to the others who come just for the sun and sea, for an inclusive resort, for a sport, for religion, for a music festival, for a cultural activity, or simply to work for 3 days in our country. I think we should be taking the discussion forward in terms of these niches and evolve ourselves as the choice for a number of these niches in terms of the place where you'd like to work, relax, heal, enjoy culture, create culture. This is, I believe, our calling, and it is imperative on us now more than ever to go in this direction, which is why we need to now put our money where our mouth is and effectively work towards improving the quality of life in this country in such a way that benefits not only the tourists, but all types of visitors, and at the end of the day, the permanent tourist which resides in Malta, which is perhaps the foreigners who migrate to the country, or effectively the locals who need to enjoy a better quality of life here, otherwise they would move on to elsewhere. So I think that for every sector, what it boils down to is to find this right mix, this right formula of investment in environment, investment in social cohesion, and investment in productivity. It will not be easy. We've been saying this for a number of years. Now that the COVID truth has caught up with us, we must take it even more seriously. Otherwise, our competitors will beat us to it.
Tony?
Yeah. Well, we always have to start from the position of what are our strengths and what are our weaknesses. I think one of our, if you can call it that, one of our weaknesses is the fact that we are 331 square kilometers in size. Therefore, when we are trying to plan out a strategy, we have to take this into consideration. We cannot think in terms of attracting ever-increasing numbers of people that live in Malta. And I'll take an example. We have had quite a lot of workers coming in, especially third country nationals, coming into the country to work as frontliners particularly in the hospitality industry. Yes, they do add to the economy because they are here, they're renting, they're spending, and they do add to the economy. But wouldn't it be a little bit more beneficial if we targeted the higher end worker who can work from Malta, especially in this time? I see that Barbados, for example, have just announced that working from home does not need to mean that you are working from Essex or Leon. Working from home can be working from Barbados, which is a nice place to work in, and you're still working from home. And therefore, they're encouraging people of high net worth to go to Barbados and still work from home. So there are new niches, as Gordon is saying, that we can start attracting. But we have to start thinking in terms of what is the added value. For example, I see Malta Enterprise, Ryan. In the old days, we used to have a situation where we had a very high labor content. We made jeans, etc., etc. We then switched on to making high quality, higher income content than we do at the present moment. I.e., we need a lot of skill in order to make a product here in Malta and make it satisfactorily and at a profit. We need to go onto this idea into everything that we do. What is the added value that somebody is going to bring in when he comes into Malta? It's added value that matters. We have a small island and we need to start thinking about added value. Is this a high added value or is this a low added value? And we have always got to fall into the higher added value. Otherwise, all we're going to do is put huge pressure on our infrastructure, huge pressure on our limited resources, and getting very low return. This is my view on the situation, on how we move forward. I'd like to hear the opinion of my colleagues on this subject, especially Gordon.
Will you take this, Gordon, or shall I move on to Brian?
Yes, I think we're very much in agreement, Tony, that we've been trying hard at this mission as a country for a number of years. Now we should really make it our mantra, and we should be measuring ourselves not simply by the amount of jobs created or GDP generated, but effectively by the investments that we're making in all the dimensions that contribute to sustainable and sustained development to have that higher quality business in Malta, including then, once we have that product, the branding of the country in this direction. We must we must start to be perceived very much as the Barbados example that Tony gave, as the place where, in order to conduct business ranging from tourism to ICT to gaming, so that we retain the variety of the diversification of economic activity that we have, while nurturing the competitiveness of each sector. I think with this COVID difficulty, these messages should now be brought even closer to home to all the social partners involved.
Brian, in the last measures announced by government, one of the significant ones was the significant investment in infrastructure for your sister organization MIP. Do you see that there is demand from different industries to come to Malta to bring in this added value? One of the examples that I always quote is the aviation industry, which is, although a manufacturing industry, manages to create added value which is close to the services industry, or the sales per capita is very similar to the services industry. I'd love to hear your take on this.
Yes, definitely. I mean, at Malta Enterprise, our focus is to get high value-adding activities in manufacturing and in services-oriented activities. We are also moving towards getting together companies that would actually be developing something related to software, and that then needs to be manufactured to create interlinkages between the services and the manufacturing industry as well. With respect to Malta Industrial Parks, we work very closely with Malta Industrial Parks. And obviously, even right now, we have a number of companies related to pharmaceutical industry who actually want to set up in Malta, and we're in the process of allocating factory space to them. The efforts of how we do our foreign direct investments promotion is not that we go out there and we target everyone. No, that is not the approach. And as Tony Sar and even Dr. Cordina was saying, I mean, we need to focus and to determine which type of businesses we want to attract to Malta. So we actually micro-target companies. So we identify companies that we really believe can add value. Usually these companies, we are not speaking about companies that would employ 300, 400 people, but we go towards more smaller sized companies that have the opportunity to actually grow in Malta. Even from the information that we have right now, obviously COVID impacted our operations and how we operate. We kept in touch with the investors that had pledged that they will be setting up in Malta. And most of these projects are still on the cards, so they are taking place. Realistically speaking, obviously, even because of complications with traveling, some of them will be taking place a bit down the line, but they are still going to materialize, which is very important. During these first 6 months of the year, we have also approved a number of projects. And here I would emphasize that we are not after the numbers. Sometimes we tend to be obsessed with numbers. We need to focus our attention on the quality of the projects attracted. And just to give you some examples, we have projects in pharmaceuticals, in life sciences, medical devices, in education related to maritime and to aviation, also to help the aviation cluster to grow more. We have in biometrics, artificial intelligence, digital games. So these are just a few sectors in which projects have been approved during these 6 months. We are also seeing a lot of interest in COVID-19 related areas. So, for example, we have companies that are showing an interest and are inquiring about doing elementary vaccinations related to what's happening as well. We have also in the area of artificial intelligence, track and tracing applications, artificial intelligence and healthcare that takes us to medtech. So the interest that we are getting from the ground is all related to high value adding activities. After all, the aim of Malta Enterprise is not just to get the project to Malta, but to ensure that the jobs being created will result in a better quality of life for everyone who is working here, being if the person is an expat or being if it is a Maltese. So I think this forms the pillars on what we want to do. We are not here just to get the numbers, but we are here to ensure that what we get actually adds quality to what already is taking place in Malta, and to branch out into innovative areas that maybe these activities are not yet taking place in Malta, but will obviously be prospering because of the COVID-19 and other economic development.
Anthony Greg, this importance of increasing productivity and creating more efficiencies in whatever we do, how does that resonate with your operation? And can you share some thoughts that you have about the subject matter?
So with regards to creativity, innovativity, and even production, from our end, we're trying our best, obviously, to try to innovate as much as possible, and even in terms, always keeping in mind sustainability with everything that we do, since we need to focus a lot on the social aspect and even the environmental aspect. So when it comes to innovativity, we are continuously enhancing and improving especially our e-commerce system. We're trying to evolve it, and even we also already done so by increasing further platforms and not just the online shopping of our online portal. We've also are trying to brainstorm and also trying to come up with further ideas on how to enhance even further. For example, when it comes to the manufacturing side, the factory, at first we were continuously seeing business-to-business aspect. However, after the pandemic, we are now also going into the business to residential aspect, and we've even launched an online portal purely for that side. And in fact, we're aiming to distribute across the whole country in terms of the fruit and vegetable area. So to continue enhancing further on what the other presenters are saying is that you need to make further business diversification in order to try to be more productive and more and to enhance your industry.
Tony, if I may, but when we look around us, there are blocks of flats all being built, new hotels being built, extensions to hotels being built. How are we actually going to manage to fill all of these up, but still think about quality and achieve better quality?
This is an interesting question, George. 2 years ago, I spoke out and I said, if anybody has not committed any money towards a new project in tourism, please think again. And I said, because there's going to be tremendous overcapacity. It doesn't seem as if entrepreneurs in Malta can count, because you don't need to be a tremendous expert to know that if you have already got 2.7 million tourist arrivals spending 7 nights and bursting at the seams and not even being able to service them correctly without having hundreds, if not thousands, of third country nationals coming to Malta. You know, what you're saying is, sorry, you know, they've invested the money. They're capitalists. They should have asked about it before they did the investment. So our policy, I don't think, should be dictated by people who have made their decisions. It should be dictated by the national interest. What is the national interest? That is how I think it should be dictated. What is the, you know, this country for too long now has not thought about the national interest. We must start talking about national interest. What is the national interest? What is going to give our people a better standard of life? I'm sorry that I have to be so blunt on these issues, but you asked me a blunt question, George, so I had to be a little bit blunt with my answer.
But you're right. You were on record a couple of years ago saying that we're overbuilding, and it's clear that you were right in that predicament. In terms of the foreign direct investment that you are seeing, Brian. Is it possible to continue attracting investment into Malta without the need to increase the population? Population figures in Malta have spiraled, some say, out of control. We are counting 515,000 by the end of 2019. And I always say, I always qualify those numbers. Those are the numbers which are registered. I believe that we are much more living in Malta. How can Malta Enterprise get more investment, continue to bring in foreign direct investment without the need to resort to so many European nationals and third-party country nationals coming to Malta, needing to have to come to Malta?
Our end, obviously, how our incentive structure is, people need to be here physically to be able to get our assistance. But this relates to the point that was mentioned by Tony and Gordon before. It's not about the quantity, but it's about the quality. We will always need to keep on attracting expats to work in Malta, because the Maltese population will not be enough to service the vacancies that are arising. However, our focus is to get the high-end individuals. And that is where we focus all our attention. I mean, one needs to find a balance, because otherwise, if you don't have any employees, and I know that this might be something that in the tech industry will be gaining traction after COVID, because as we've seen, most of the people actually can work remotely from everywhere. But at least they would need to spend a good chunk of the year here in Malta to be able to get our incentives. I mean, there is also an economic argument when these people need to be here, because we cannot actually subsidize and give assistance to someone who is not even residing in Malta most of the time. I mean, we need also to factor in that there needs to be a tangible relationship with the country where this person is living as well. But I don't exclude that the models like which Tony Zara referred to can actually work as well, that people will not spend the whole year in Malta. They will just come spend a good number of days from here in Malta and spend the rest of the year in other countries. I mean, this was seen before COVID taking place, and I think what actually COVID has done is it accelerated the rate at which we will start to encounter these situations. Within themselves offer a lucrative opportunity that one needs to think about and to decide how, if we decide actually to pursue that through, how to benefit and to make the best out of this opportunity.
Is Tony or Gordon, I'm not sure whether Gordon is still on the line. Do you foresee any measures, any new measures coming from government to support or to incentivize increases in productivity and the achievement of the objectives that we are talking about? Do you believe that there is still room for more measures to be taken, or do you think now is time for all entrepreneurs to get on with it and see what they can do on their own?
If I can have one final comment, also because time is pressing, government should always be there not to replace private industry, but to provide those essential services which the free market economy left to its own devices can never come up with. This includes the competition for foreign direct investment, and especially nowadays, foreign direct investment in human capital. As we've said earlier on, liquidity is abundant. It has been so at least since 2008, when money has become a free commodity. Where we are really competing, I think, is to attract the best talent in order to suit our industries, which cannot be of an excessively large size, but which in their smallness need to be nimble, productive, and competitive on a global level. I think that this is the next challenge for entities such as Malta Enterprise, Malta Industrial Parks, Malta Tourism Authority, Malta Financial Services Authority, Gaming Malta, and similar sectors who are actively involved in business promotion in the country in order to help us with the current situation, but essentially to make Malta a viable and feasible island over the next decades.
Yes, I think there's always areas where you can improve on, because the world does not stand still. So we've got to look at the situation as we go along and adjust accordingly. We started off a long time ago, well before you were born, George, probably, by introducing a tax rate called the 6-penny tax rate, which brought in a lot of foreigners to live in Malta. We used to call them permanent tourists, and they were permanent tourists actually. So today we need to think in terms of how do we see Malta in 15 years' time. I think that we have to rebalance slightly the economy. I think that we have seen how important it is to have a strong manufacturing base. Because if something happens to your services, you have got this strong manufacturing base. So I see this as an opportunity to have a look at what we are offering people who invest in manufacturing. Should we have a bigger bias, especially for Maltese investors who would want to go into manufacturing? It's much more difficult. It's not a building where you can see and you can feel, etc. Manufacturing has a lot of difficulties. So should we be offering a bigger package to those people that are risking more because they're going in a different sector? I think so. I think we should be looking at that. Our tourism, should we be looking to incentivize that which offers more added value? So we should be looking at what we are doing and seeing whether what we're doing is in line with what we want to be in 15 years' time. If it's not, let's adjust it to bring us to what we want to be in 15 years' time.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your very valid comments. Thank you, Gordon. Any last comments from you, Brian and Anthony?
I think as the last comment, I mean, it's true. We are living through a very challenging time, but usually it is during these periods that the most innovative ideas come out. And I strongly believe that the new norm will actually be an improved norm for most of us. When we will look back, we will say COVID helped us to accelerate our rate of technological development. So I will not be discouraged. That's true. It's a difficult time. But when we look forward, we will understand that during this time we have achieved quite a lot, and actually we will be living in the future.
I totally agree with Ryan. From the experience that I had during the past months, the number of updates that we had to implement within 2 years, we had managed to do so in 2 months. And I think even though it is a tough period and challenging, the advantages and the innovative stuff and ideas that we are doing at the moment will improve both the industry and the economy in the long run.
Thank you all for your very, very valid comments, for sharing your experiences, for also ending up with very encouraging words. Thank you for the time that you have spent with us, and for the next time. Thank you very much. Bye.